Well, I want to thank you, all of you. Thank you so much. Welcome to Mindfulness and Compassion Week. My name is Eric Forbes. I'm the founder of Wisdom for Life. I want to thank you for being part of this with us. So glad to be joined today by Jon Kabat Zinn. Today we're looking at the important topic of humanity at a crossroads, our future, the digital age. And Jon is really a real thought leader in the field of mindfulness. He's the founder of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which has helped countless people around the world over the last 40 years, more than 40 years now. He's professor of medicine emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. He's the author of the best-selling book, Full Catastrophe Living. Jon, welcome to Mindfulness Compassion Week. It's so wonderful to have you joining us today.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't you open with a little opening talk, and then after your brief talk, we'll open it up to questions. And for those of you that are watching, if you look at the bottom of the page that you're on, we have a community forum there, and we invite you to submit questions and just ask if you give us your first name and where you're from, so we have a little bit more of a connection with you, and then we'll get to as many questions as possible. So Jon, why don't you take it away, and then after you finish your talk and you're ready for questions, I'll start asking them.
Wonderful. Well, thanks very much, Eric, and it's a pleasure to be here, and welcome to all of you. Now, this was billed in part as mindfulness in an era of high tech and the challenges of that. And I just want to point out that I gave a whole talk some months ago for Mindful Norway, and I believe that was shown as part of this whole summit. And so I'm not going to go into what I said there in any great detail, but I will say a few things to introduce the topic and to bring it together with the domain of mindfulness and compassion, and then maybe a brief guided meditation. And then I think I'd love to have dialogue. We'll take the questions and Eric will read them to me and I'll respond to them, and we'll just do the best we can. But I want to welcome you, whether you're watching this live or whether you will be watching it at some other time. And to welcome you no matter what time zone you're in, no matter what country you're in. If you have tuned into this summit and to this particular program in particular, there's some profound data in that to sort of look at it from the point of view of the digital age, that people are constantly monitoring our attention and how long we stay on every single site we ever visit. And all of that is being monetized in a certain way to understand how to get as much of the appropriate advertising in front of our eyeballs as possible to keep us hooked on the screen. Now, in an era of global pandemic, which is far, far, far from over, the beauties of the technology are kind of totally self-evident. This being one of them. If it weren't for Zoom and all the other platforms that allow us to connect in this kind of way, imagine how much more isolation there would have been during this 14 months of hell and counting that we've all been through. So this is not to knock technology at all, but actually to just understand what the potential benefits of the technology are, and also the potential downside, shadow side, or danger of this, which very often, if you listen to the talk that I gave for Mindful Norway, have to do with monetizing our attention, trying to basically predict our behavior, and then throw constant notifications and websites at us that will keep us paying attention. What that does is, in some sense, rob us of our analog life. It robs us of our agency, and it robs us in a certain way of our capacity to know whether we're making our own decisions or whether we're being set up so that it feels like we're making our own decisions, but we're actually not. And so I would advise you or recommend, whether you've seen it or not, to watch the movie The Social Dilemma again and again and again, and to listen very deeply to all of the people that are featured in that movie, many of whom are mindfulness practitioners, who were major agents in moving the domain of the digital world into this scenario, which some people have described, and I think rightly so, as surveillance capitalism, where we really are surrendering our privacy and, in some sense, our lives. And I would ask you to even think about just the effects of the pandemic, wonderful as Zoom and email and everything else to stay connected have been, in the quality of your life. Since I can tell you that from my own experience, and I try to keep some kind of balance in it, that just looking at screens for hours, day after day after day, everything seems to blend together, and all the details become a lot harder to keep straight in the forefront of my hippocampus and working memory, because it all is like, on this two-dimensional screen. So there's the beauty and the benefits of this, but there's also the shadow side. And we really are, as a species, at a crossroads in this regard. So again, watch the movie multiple times. Go on the website of the Humane Technology, the Center for Humane Technology, which is Tristan Harris, who is the really central figure in the movie and the moving force behind it. He's the head of the Center for Humane Technology and the real articulate voice for the dangers of this and the importance of bringing mindfulness and heartfulness in every conceivable way into this interface, both to protect ourselves from this assault on our well-being and this imperialization, if you will, or colonization of our own minds and working memory and attention. And he works with an extraordinary group of colleagues, and they have even a podcast there, which I'm blanking on the name of it at the moment, but it's really wonderful. So let's just think for a moment. Let's drop in for yourself and ask yourself, how much of the time, if you bring awareness to it, do you feel that you are reacting to your phone or to your technology in a way that has an addictive quality to it, that is like propelled out of whatever's happening in the moment? If you get a notification or you feel like you have to watch this or have to, respond to that, is there a sense that in some way or other you are becoming a kind of passive puppet to the kinds of energies that are coming at you in your life? So you can bring mindfulness to this. You can bring moment-to-moment, open-hearted presence, non-judgmental awareness to what happens when your phone rings or your notifications go off, or even how many times a day do you even have the thought, I better check my email? And then are you already on your way to checking your email because that thought propels a certain kind of action? So this is a way in which you can cultivate mindfulness of the interface, if you will, between our digital connections with the world and our analog selves. Because our biology is beautifully analog, although it is, in some sense, information technology on a unbelievably sophisticated evolutionary scale. So there are interfaces even there between the, digital technology and digital intelligence and analog intelligence. But we haven't begun to scratch the surface on how to actually understand the deep structure of our own intelligences. And I would suggest that in some sense, even without digital technology, human beings, because of our driven qualities of our own minds when we don't know ourselves, that we are beginning to function in the post-industrial age as a kind of autoimmune disease of planet Earth, that we've given the planet a fever, that for all the beauty and the good that we've also brought a lot of death and destruction to other species and, of course, to ourselves. We're the only species that destroys its own members at this kind of a level. And perhaps it is time for us to recognize that we're at a critical crossroads on the planet as a species and as life on Earth, and that maybe we need to wake up to the full dimensionality of what our humanity offers us. And this is where mindfulness and compassion, they're not some kind of ancillary things that we bring in from the wings to somehow magically make things better. They are absolutely fundamental to what you might call our true nature as human beings. And it all lies in the domain of human awareness, which is not at all understood in terms of science, what the Buddhists might call sentience, but we have no idea how sentience and awareness, human awareness, arise. But when we learn how to actually inhabit our own awareness as a space, an embodied space in the world, in the mind, in the heart, in the body, it gives us a new degree of freedom that actually is profoundly healing and transformative, and that allows us to navigate the challenges of this moment in ways that bring our multiple intelligences on board 100%, as opposed to just like wandering in the dark or getting caught in endless cycles of greed, hatred, delusion, and the pain and the suffering, both physical and emotional and social and economic and political, that engenders, and that you can see or feel anytime you want to by just opening a newspaper or turning on the cable news. So if you're tuning into this, that actually says something about your aspiration or interest or desire to find ways to regulate what's coming at us from the outside and from the inside in our own tumultuous, tempestuous minds and reactivity and drivenness, and find a way to not simply transform the world, but to be fully alive in the only moment we ever have, because without that, then it's always about idealizing some future when everything will be better, but right now it's not good enough for me to actually be myself, or to be happy, or to be fulfilled. And it's not about like, well, I'll be happy when everything comes together. It's never, ever going to come together. It never has come together. The nature of wisdom and compassion is to work with things as they are and find authentic ways to be in wise relationship to the number one challenge that we're facing on the planet, which is our own lack of awareness of the way in which we can generate endless suffering for ourselves and others, when the alternative is right under our noses in any and every moment. And I mean that both metaphorically as well as literally. So let's take a few moments now and just I'm going to ask you to, if you care to, close your eyes, although that's not at all necessary. But in any way, shape, or form that makes sense to you, establish yourself in a posture in front of this weird screen, a posture that embodies wakefulness and dignity. No matter what time zone you're in, no matter what time of day or night it is, it's always here and now where we are. And can you actually tune into a sense of the body as a whole sitting here breathing? You are breathing, so it's not like you have to fabricate or conjure that up, but can you, without fooling around with your breathing now that I've mentioned it, simply let the sensations of the breath moving in the body become more vivid? And attend to them. So this has everything to do with how we reclaim and mobilize and utilize our own attention. So for now, even though we're doing it through technology, seeing if you can, close your eyes so that you leave the technology to the audio and simply attend to the experience of being here, wherever here is for you. And now, in this only moment any of us ever have, to think, to live, to feel, to love, to attend, and dare I say, to be. And as we do this, of course, many of you have been meditating for decades, and some of you may be brand new to it, but I'm guessing a lot of you had a meditation practice for a very long time. But how alive is it? Because it's never about how long I've been meditating, it's about how things are now. And even questioning the I that claims to be a meditator and turn it all into a kind of thing, when actually it's a kind of way of being in wise relationship with experience, all experience. And so, as best you can, taking up residency in awareness, while even if you're attending to the breath and the breath in the body, that the awareness, it's never about the objects of attention when we take our seat to meditate. It's always about the attending. And that's kind of like a conduit between the deploying of our attention, and then our attending, and then the dropping into wakefulness, into awareness, pure awareness, and it's always here. It's on us to actually remember that and keep coming back, so that we learn how to actually more and more in our lives inhabit moment to moment, non-reactive, non-judgmental awareness, which would include seeing how reactive and judgmental we are. So it doesn't matter. The awareness is so big and the embrace of mindfulness is so big, can hold it all. And then I'm doing a lot of talking, but underneath it all is the silence underneath the words, in between the words. And if I stop talking, well, here you are in your fullness, right in this moment. No longer even striving or trying to attend, but simply awake, aware, and allowing anything and everything to arise and pass away in the boundless spaciousness of awareness, including sensations in the body, thoughts, emotions, sounds. And just inviting being like this to become your default mode, your go-to place where you don't even have to go, because it's all you need to do is recognize that your awareness is always here. But access to it's not always so great because it gets clouded over and with brambles and thorns and obstacles of one kind or another, because our attention is being captured and our emotions are being, in some sense, dysregulated by various kinds of pursuing and rejecting and caught in thought, always looking for something better, a better moment. And so never inhabiting the only one we ever have and the only one that can actually transform the future. Because if you don't know what's really going on this moment, that ignorance colors the next moment. Whereas if you are open and aware, embodied and touch in this moment, well, that colors the next moment too. And so we live our way moment by moment into the future we most value, potentially. And it's a love affair. The formal meditation practice, a love affair with life. And the real meditation practice isn't formal meditation practice, but we need that as much as we need what we sometimes call informal meditation practice, but it's really just life. Life is the real curriculum. Life is the real meditation practice. The good, the bad, and the ugly. To conjure up a movie title. The full catastrophe of the human condition. That's the curriculum. And guess what? Human awareness is large enough. The human heart is large enough to hold it all. And not be involved so much in tinkering and fixing as in healing, which in my vocabulary means coming to terms with things as they are, the good, the bad, and the dangerous and the terrifying. And coming to terms doesn't mean passive resignation or surrender by any means. It means recognition and then realization of potential for transformation and freedom, liberation right in this moment. Not the domain of the few, but the inheritance of virtually all of us by virtue of being human. And so just simply giving yourself over to resting in awareness as best you can. And anytime you notice that awareness has disappeared and you're lost in thought, carried away in the thought stream or whatever, well, you just sum up something, just notice that, and so you're already back. And so thoughts and distractions, they don't have to be obstacles. And you can bring awareness to those distractions when it's the technology that's distracting you. That's a very, very worthy 21st century mindfulness practice. Mindfulness of your relationship with your phone. And everything that it gives you and everything that it robs you of. When you're ready, I'd like to invite you to simply open your eyes. And continue gazing at the screen or drinking in whatever is in front of you around the screen. Noticing that your breath didn't stop. Your body's still here. There's no reason that your awareness can't be a seamless continuity of moments. And so that's what I mean when I say that the meditation practice is life itself. It's not sitting in the full lotus posture or on the floor or any of the other formal practices that you might really value and be part of your life. I certainly value them, and I see them as like really radical acts of sanity and love to take your seat both, literally on a regular basis and live a disciplined life, because this is like a huge human challenge. So it does require a certain amount of discipline, but it's not about getting better at something or becoming a master of something or, kind of improving your meditation or improving who you are as a person. There's no improving on who you are. You're already perfect as you are, including all of your imperfections that your mind is going to come up with and say, well, Jon doesn't really know who I am because I'm a basket case, and here are the infinite number of reasons why, supporting reasons. And that, you know what that's all called? That's all thinking. And the you that knows that is already free from all of it if you exercise this muscle. So it does require a certain amount of real discipline, but that discipline itself is part of the love affair. So notice the silence is here anytime your mind is willing to notice it. Underneath all the talk, in between the words, in the larger air and space and sky around you. And that silence has a certain kind of equanimity to it and clarity to it and penetrative awareness, so that we don't get necessarily caught up in appearances, in forms, or in an attachment to having things have to be a certain way and then becoming dysregulated because they're not that way. And you can feel that you like start to clench up, and then it affects everything. I mean, it's like stress, sleep, what we eat, how much we eat. I mean, it's just endless. So all of this relates intimately to the practice of mindfulness and to the cultivation of compassion. And I'll just say, in closing out this piece of it before we go to Q&A, that in Asian languages, I've been told, for the most part, in Asian languages, the word for mind, which is a big word, and it's very, very different from brain, but the word for mind and the word for heart is the same word. So in English, when you hear the word mindfulness, if you're not hearing, immediately, instinctively hearing the word heartfulness, you're not really understanding what we're talking about when we talk about mindfulness as a radical act of sanity, a radical act of love, a radical act of embodied wakefulness. So there's no separation. It's not like you have to work on mindfulness and then, I'm getting good at mindfulness, but boy, I'm terrible at compassion. They're not separate. They're not two separate things. And all of that stuff, including, and this is an occupational hazard of the mindfulness universe, because there's so much hype in the mindfulness universe, is that we'll build mindfulness into and reify it into a thing, and we'll reify compassion into a thing, and then we'll never be good enough to really get either of them, because we're trying to be like somebody else or some kind of contrived ideal. That's the exact opposite of wisdom. It's the exact opposite of clarity. And it's the exact opposite of understanding what realization would really be about. So we're going to stop here, because I really treasure the opportunity to, enter into dialogue with you. Let's just go for it. And I'll do the best I can. But I want to just say, before anybody asks a question, that if you have questions, the best resource for finding answers to those questions is you. And the answers to your questions, I'm willing to wager, to a very large degree, are resting right inside the very place in you where the questions are arising. Because without that, there would be no way in which you could formulate an intelligent question unless you had some kind of deep possibility for letting your own insight into the nature of the question deliver what lies at the heart of the question itself. And that is trustworthy. So I want to encourage you to not merely ask experts or people who happen to be well-known or whatever questions of one kind or another. Ask yourself the question. This is the same thing as what I said about if you're tuning into this at all, there's some resonance in you that brought you to it. So when you're asking a question, there's some resonance in you that brought you to the question or brought the question to you that knows a lot more than just what the question is asking. And so play with that, explore it, see what's possible. And that's where creativity and imagination come from in us humans. And they are not sequestered qualities in a few geniuses. Our genius as humanity, the miraculous nature of our being is that we all share in that genius. And it's really good not to disregard it. So let's go for it.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you so much. So I just invite anyone who has a question, you can scroll to the bottom of the page and we have a form there. We invite you to submit your question and just ask that you give us your first name and where you're from, just so we have a little bit more of a connection to you. Jon, just to share a personal anecdote before we get started with the questions. About 10 years ago or so, I discovered mindfulness and I was in Washington, D.C. at the time. I just gotten started as part of the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, D.C. With Tara Brach. And there was an event in New York that I went to that you were part of, and it was on, I think it was Creating a Mindful Society. And I was brand new to all this, but I was like so interested, and I was like, even in the beginnings of my interest, I was like, ooh, maybe I wanted to see like what I could maybe do to be helpful to, kind of help bring this to others. And
I remember that evening very vividly.
Oh, so nice.
66th Street or 67th Street, if I recall.
Yeah, exactly.
At Central Park West.
Yep. And you gave and either you said during your remarks or you answered a question around what the definition of mindfulness is. And you said, basically, more or less, you said it's non-judgmental moment-to-moment awareness. Yeah. And it just hit me like that was just so clear, so concise. Like I immediately wrote it down. And like that's been my working definition of mindfulness.
I'm thrilled. That's really wonderful to hear. And I have to say that definition is not meant to be immediately understandable. It's kind of a little bit like a koan. People have a lot of trouble with the non-judgmental part because they misunderstand it as saying, oh, I should be non-judgmental. So we have to sort of like, and you heard me say it during the guided meditation, to not judge how judgmental we are, but to recognize like, wow, our lives are completely out of control in terms of that. And so when you don't judge that, then all of a sudden things shift in a profound way. So thanks for sharing that experience, because whether it's me or anybody else who's featured on the screen or in person or whatever, you actually never know while you're wagging your tongue and talking to a group of people what the effect of it is on other people. And the fact that even one sentence or something like that had an effect on you 10 years ago, that's why we all are doing this, because we're all teaching each other. And there's nobody who's on this call or on the planet that doesn't have something that they can actually teach us to remind us of how big our humanity is, our own individual humanity, and how much bigger it is than the narratives we tell ourselves when we get caught up in I, me, and mine. So thanks so much for that. That feels like its own private gift. And it makes me feel, in some sense, like now I know on another level why I'm doing this with you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, we do have some questions. So here, let's start with Siswati from the UK. Thank you for being here. How do we utilize technology to the betterment of ourselves?
Well, Saswati, again, this is one of those questions where you can probably answer that better than I can. I don't know. This is one example. As I said, I mean, if it weren't for Zoom, I mean, it's almost unimaginable how isolated we would have been, and how many things that have been able to go forward during the pandemic, including even getting food to people, wouldn't have been possible. So we live in a very much a digital age where we have to learn how to be in wise relationship with the technology rather than to like Luddite-like just, abandon it. That's just not possible. And of course, you wouldn't have been able to ask the question without it. So what would it be for you now, just in this moment? And it doesn't have to be for the rest of your life, but just like for today. The decisions that you could make to go out for a walk and leave your device at home, or go out for a walk and not plug in anything into your ears. It's little things like that that can make them go out. You mean go out without my phone for an analog walk? Yeah, we've only been on the planet for I don't know how, evolution of humanity, but it's like several million years in the form of Homo sapiens sapiens, at least. And, almost none of that time has been with phones. That's like an infinitesimally small period of time. So what about reclaiming? And the body is a great place to start. So that's why I started with the breath. That's why I started with a dignified posture, how you stand, how you carry the body, how you walk, not in a contrived, pretend that I'm your more mindful way, but in a really alive way that's authentically in alignment with your heart. And play with that. And then the world becomes your teacher. Everything becomes your teacher. And by the way, that podcast from the Center for Humane Technology is called Your Undivided Attention. Very clever. Play on words. And is that possible to give your undivided attention to, say, going for a walk in nature, by the seashore, or in the woods, or on a mountain, or whatever, and let the air talk to you, let the land talk to you, let the birds sing to you, and see it all as like poetry.
Thank you. All right, Mert Hallis from Istanbul says, I work as a classroom teacher. How can we personalize what we learned from mindfulness? I'm using it in my classroom, but I'm very careful about my steps. I want to give freedom to myself about using it. Are you still learning about it every day?
Yeah, of course. The beauty of mindfulness as a practice and as a way of life. So let's be clear. It is a formal practice. It does involve discipline of a certain kind, but it is also a way of being in wise relationship with life itself. And so therefore, that's why I'm saying it's a love affair with life itself, but not a self-centered, narcissistic one. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't continuing to not only nurture me, but in some sense reveal deeper and deeper domains of interest. And they're unpredictable. I'm trained as a molecular biologist at MIT with a Nobel laureate. And I'm experiencing this spring and the flowering of, what's around me in nature. And not just flowers, but even the leaves of trees in a way that I've never actually recognized before, never connected with, like how much water needs to be pumped up to make those green leaves, and how the chlorophyll is all like just synthesized so that everything all of a sudden turns green. We're talking about, and the flowers, every single one. You look at a poppy, and then you look at the peonies, and then you look at, some of these crazy bulbs that come up, and like the geometry of it, like nature is totally mind-blowing everywhere you look, outwardly and also inwardly. And no matter how depressed you are, or how much badly you feel about yourself, or even how much trauma you've had in your life, the beauty so outweighs the suffering that it really is the adventure of a lifetime to begin to trust that dimension of your own being, and just let the adventure be continuous, and the learning too.
Thank you.
And just to say, in terms of Istanbul, I think I'm doing something on June 29th in Istanbul, which you could probably find on Google. But my first book, Full Catastrophe Living, which has been out now for 31 years, and is translated into a lot of different languages, is finally coming out in Turkish. And I'm doing something around that for a group that's promoting it. But to just say, I've only been to Istanbul once, but it's a magical place. And so there's so much wisdom and energy in that culture, in that society. So just hello from here to where you are.
Nice. Thanks, Jon. See, Teresa from a suburb of Philadelphia. I work as a trainer and coach with clients in a corporate environment. Two of the pillars that folks struggle with in that environment are non-striving and non-judging, since almost the opposite is emphasized through goal setting, work hard, and the performance management process, ratings and critical feedback.
Yep.
How can we build an appreciation for those pillars for the corporate audience?
Any way you can. You see, it's like, I can't give you the answer to that, but your practice could bring you into a sort of creative, stretch the envelope kind of space where you see how you might be able to plant and water those kinds of seeds. Because, everybody is pretty much wired up the same way. And although we sometimes feel imprisoned by, or let's say we sometimes feel not just driven, but imprisoned by our own agendas. Who is it that's feeling imprisoned? What does that person want? What does that aspect of you want? I once offered a mindfulness program at a very, very elite, high, sort of business environment for, sort of super executives. And we started out in a circle in the room with maybe 50 people, and they all showed up in three-piece suits, including the women, kind of. And they're reading newspapers, waiting for things to start and stuff like that. And when it was time to start the thing and close the doors, I just said, why don't we just take a few moments and sit here with no agenda whatsoever? And several of these three-piece suit executives actually started crying. And I just had to ask. I said, well, what's this about? And he said, we never do anything without an agenda. So yeah, we have our agendas and we have to stick to our agendas, but we also need to ask the deep question about, what is the agenda serving, and who is being instrumental in bringing the agenda to deliver the objectives that we have on the blackboard or on the PowerPoint presentation. And then let's actually bring the non-instrumental into the room. Because just like an electron or any elementary particle in physics cannot be described as either a particle or a wave, it depends on how it's interrogated, so to speak, investigated. It has what's called in physics a complementary nature, that a particle under some situations acts like a wave. In other situations, there's an element of mystery to it. That's actually the same with the mind and the heart. So meditation looks like it's just like learning to play the violin or the piano or anything else. We just got practice and practice and you'll get better and better. But then there's the non-instrumental piece of it that from the very beginning, not when you get advanced or you're like a great advanced meditator, from the very beginning, there's actually no place to go with meditation. If you're striving to get to some other place, you're light years away. There's no place to go. There's nothing to do. It's not about doing. It's about being as in human being, and you already have them. And there's nothing to attain. It's not about like becoming a better meditator, as I said, or, enlightened, that very, very dangerous E word. So when we bring the instrumental, which is driving business like nobody's business, together with the non-instrumental, then we could ask orthogonal questions like, what the hell business are we in? While we're doing the business, because you could be outcompeted by your competitors 5 years from now because you didn't take the entire landscape of new possibilities in a very rapidly changing environment into account. So if you really care about your business, that's not a question you ask once every 5 years in a kind of, what do they call it? A kind of, what do they call that thing? It's like a review, it's sort of like, doesn't matter, whatever the hell they call it. And then they put that review on the shelf and everybody, genuflects to it for 5 minutes and then forgets it. But this is an ongoing moment-to-moment practice. Business then becomes a practice. Business then becomes a love affair. Business then becomes a mindfulness engagement where you really understand the business, including who the customers are, what the entire stream of products are, and all of that kind of stuff, so that that it's in some sense a living organism and it has new potentials. So that orthogonal dimension is actually essential to any kind of imagination and creativity, and for that matter, happiness at work. So what we're talking about here is really the Tao, T-A-O, of work. And it's not like, I'm going to tell you what it is. It's like, it's the adventure of a lifetime. What is it? Again, just like, why did you tune into this particular, why do you do the work that you do? Where's the love in it? If there's no love in it, maybe it's time for you to find some other work, because soon you'll be dead. So, what are the degrees of freedom that you actually have? And I don't mean that personally, soon you will be dead. I mean, that's just kind of like the prognosis for life on this planet, is that it comes and it goes like that. Even if you're very young, it's like, it's unpredictable. So the present moment becomes incredibly valuable as a kind of Archimedes fulcrum to leverage wisdom and compassion, not as kind of like extra added dimensions when you become successful enough to have, a lot of cash on hand, but at the actual deep foundation of the business itself.
Thanks, Jon. Robin is asking, well, she says first and then asks, technology can bring people together and separate us. How can we use technology in a safe way to keep us out of our silos?
Well, I think we're doing it right here. We're using technology. I mean, where is this person asking the question from?
She didn't say.
Okay, but someplace on the planet. Certainly not where I am, and it's probably not where you are, right? I mean, we're all in our separate silos at the moment. It's like so self-evident that it's easy to miss. And so technology has this virtue of being able to connect us in some deep ways. And many people feel more comfortable, say, learning MBSR virtually like this than having to go to a hospital or a clinic or whatever, because it's more stressful to get dressed and get in the car and drive through traffic and all of that to go to someplace. And here we can be with people also from around the world and learn from each other in phenomenal ways. It was never possible before. So there's the beauty of it, and then there's also the shadow side. Again, I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but watch The Social Dilemma about 30 times, and look at the Center for Humane Technology website, because it's got phenomenal resources and very, very deep, and at the same time, extremely accessible. And then good luck. As I said, it's all practice. So it's not like, oh, if only I understood things better, then I'd be able to use technology in a more imaginative way. Figure it out. Let that come to you. You don't have to force it. We're not about striving or pushing or just being stuck in some kind of goal orientation, but really a deep inquiry into what the world is starving for, what the world is dying for, what is called for now in your life, in your family, in your work, in your body, that if you don't attend to it now, you may never attend to it because we get carried away. And if we get carried away, no problem in meditation practice or in life, just recognize it and then return to ground zero, let's say.
Thank you. Apparently, we're really big in Istanbul. A cell from Istanbul is asking, what are the most powerful ways of guiding people, especially Generation Z, into cultivating deeper presence in this digital age?
I'm too old to even know what Generation Z is. I guess it's really young people. I don't know. I can't keep track of all the generations. Read the question again.
She's asking how to guide people.
While we do this, I'm going to just hold up, because this is the second person from Istanbul. Just hold up that this is the advertisement for what I'm going to be doing on June 29th. Well, I can't read it, but probably she can.
Nice.
Okay, go ahead.
And this is a complete coincidence, by the way, for everybody.
Yeah, that's interesting.
This Istanbul connection here. She's basically asking, what are powerful ways of guiding people, but especially Generation Z, towards being more present in this digital age with so many distractions?
It would be the same for any generation. Find out where the pain is, where the suffering is. The suffering, which is in the Buddhist tradition, the first noble truth. Not that life is suffering, that's a complete misunderstanding, but that there is suffering, and that we need to actually diagnose it and recognize its nature and how it shapes us unless we cultivate these liberative practices. So whether it's Gen Z or Gen Y or Gen X or whatever, find out what the suffering is in individual people, what they are missing, what they feel they're longing for, what their view of the world is and of themselves. And then you can ask them very interesting questions like, is it true what they're saying? Because we're all generating narratives about how my life is no good or doesn't work or I don't have any time or all that stuff. You can ask yourself the fundamental question, is it actually true? Or are you believing thoughts that somehow are flitting through the mind in very, very brief moments of time? And in almost no time, these thoughts are capturing our attention. We don't even need Google for that. We capture our own attention and get diverted, distracted, carried away in ways that actually imprison us. So I welcome the younger generation. I feel like, the planet is going to depend on the younger generation recognizing its own humanity and waking up, because, those of us who are like, in the later generations, our time is soon past. And it's going to be very much up to the young people to understand the world that the older people have created and what the potential is for true freedom, liberation, democracy, equality, racial justice, social justice, economic justice, because those are profound sources of suffering as well. And we can't attend to only the psychological suffering and not recognize that there is social antecedents to suffering that are actually institutional and very much driven by huge asymmetries that have no real authenticity other than past suffering and aggression and things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Marco from Italy says, in the last few years, I've been discovering my true, very sensitive and empathic nature. I believe I had put up some barriers to avoid the suffering coming from these feelings. Now I love my true nature and don't want to go back to raising barriers, but my sensitivity makes me suffer from time to time. Would you have any tool to provide to overcome the suffering?
Yeah, that's what this is all about. I mean, if there was something more powerful to overcome suffering than mindfulness, I would be doing that. I wouldn't be doing mindfulness. I've just never found one. So here's a question. We don't have that much more time left unless we go over, but here's a question that you can ask yourself, whether it's the suffering takes the form of depression, whether it takes the form of anxiety, whether it takes the form of anger, whether it takes the form of self-loathing. You can ask yourself this very simple question, especially in those moments when those emotions arise or those feelings or thoughts arise. Is my awareness of my pain, is my awareness of my anger, is my awareness of my anxiety actually caught up in suffering? And just check it out. I'm not even going to give you an answer because I don't live inside you. But if you investigate, I'm willing to bet that you will discover that your awareness brings a whole other dimension to it, as I mentioned before, that allows you to, in that moment, hold what you're calling your pain and just have it be sensation, unpleasant, disturbing. But then who's disturbed? Who's experiencing the unpleasantness? And if you start to ask those questions about the personal pronouns, who's meditating? Who's breathing? Who's paying attention? Who's generating all these narratives? You'll find, I'm willing to bet on it, that you'll have a whole other Archimedes fulcrum or leverage or independent dimension from which to discover, uncover, or recover new openings to old problems that have been, in some sense, you might say, sinking your boat for quite some time. So again, and this will be the last question I think we'll have time for, the deep message is to trust your true nature, your deepest nature. And your deepest nature, I'm just going to throw it out there in a provocative way, is mindfulness, is heartfulness, is awareness itself. So live inside it and then learn from everybody. These kinds of online programs, books, everybody, all the different mindfulness teachers out there in all the different traditions. And then don't trust any of us. Trust yourself and your own experience. Can't go wrong.
Thank you, Jon. Wow. Well, it's been quite an hour here with you. And I think just as we close, I would just like to honor the extraordinary impact that you've had on the world, over the last 40 plus years. And, it'd be hard to overstate, just how far reaching the work that you've done and those that you've done it with, has had on this world over the last 40 plus years. And so I want to thank you for that very deeply.
Thank you. And thank you for saying, and the people I've done it with, because there's a vast network of people who I consider to be deep collaborators and friends and Dharma brothers and sisters. And as I said, we're all in this together. So it's never, whether it's me or you or anybody else, it's never about me. It's always about we in a certain way. And the koan of the moment, the deep inquiry has to be, who are we as human beings?
Mm.
And trust that inquiry and what arises from it.
Thank you. Okay, well, on that note then, a beautiful note.
Nice to see you again. It's really nice to make this connection and have it be more, human, even if it's two-dimensional on screens 3,000 miles away from each other.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for
tuning in. And be well, all of you.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.